these were some quick stats that I pulled out that are, to me, some of the most alarming. Sullivan County has the highest rate of death by suicide in the Hudson Valley by a lot. Depending on the school district, childhood obesity ranges between 29 and 40% across Sullivan County. So even the healthiest school district still has 29% of students who are considered obese. And then this is very specific, but 53% of third graders in Sullivan County have untreated cavities. To me, that is just alarming. So some of these statistics just really put us in context of the greater Hudson Valley, the greater New York region, and where we are. So one specific statistic that I want to hone in a little bit on as it relates to our conversation tonight is that Sullivan County has the lowest percentage of adults participating in leisure time activity in the Hudson Valley. So between 2013 and 2018, they took the 8 or 9 Hudson Valley counties, including, it's compared to all of New York State. But our numbers went from 75.1% of adults participating in some sort of leisure physical activity fell to 67.9%. So that could be anything from walking to going to a gym to hiking to fishing to really anything that gets you active outdoors. And so we have well over 30% of our people, 1 in 3 people, that are not getting involved in physical activity, that are not interacting with recreational activities. And when I think about Sullivan County, we have the Catskills, we have the Delaware River, we have the Never Sink River, the Shawangunk Ridge. Like, we have some of the best natural and recreational assets in the region, the state, and we could probably argue the country with some of our resources. And the fact that over 30% of people are not interacting with these spaces is just so disappointing and alarming to me. And I think that we have the power to do something about it. So what does this have to do with open space? Lots. I would say everything, but I won't get that conceded that it has everything to do with open space. But access to parks, nature, green space, blue space, which I'll talk about in a minute, these have direct benefits to both human and community health. So I'll talk about direct health incomes in a minute, but just kind of some overall benefits of open space, parks, green space, preserved natural space. It improves air quality. So the more trees you have, the more carbon that's being pulled out of the air, carbon sequestration, carbon capture. If the trees weren't pulling that carbon out of the air, or the carbon dioxide, excuse me, it would just be in the atmosphere, and that leads to global warming. Reduces noise. So I like to think of this one, living next to a forest is quieter than living next to a highway. But in addition to that, it just provides a quiet refuge. How many people have been on a hike and just had a moment of like, oh, okay, like it's very good for your mental and spiritual health. It enhances biodiversity, so it provides really valuable habitats for all the different critters that we have in our area. Moderates temperatures, so they provide shade during hot weather, and again with the carbon pulling the CO2 out of the air can help with greater climate benefits. And then they also provide a place for social interaction and civic engagement. So the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that does the county health rankings, they just did a webinar the other day in advance of releasing the new rankings, which haven't come out yet. They come out at the end of the month. And they've added a new measure to that matrix that we talked about, and that's civic engagement. They have done so much research that civic engagement, those who are involved in their communities, who go to parks, who volunteer at places, have better health outcomes than those who don't. So they just provide this really great place for social interaction and civic engagement, which again benefits everybody. So when it comes to the health specific like the human health specific benefits, there's a lot, but I'm going to start with some of the larger overarching benefits. And this is one of my favorite charts. I love this. This is from the European Environmental Agency. So some things are spelled a little bit differently, but it's showing living, working, or being educated in or near green or blue spaces has all of these benefits. What's a blue space? We kind of talk about green space, which is like parks, forests. Does anyone know what a blue space is or have an idea? Tustin has a lot of them. Water. Yeah, so there has been a lot of research as well that access to a blue space or a river, a lake, a stream, a brook, just any sort of water has really, really positive impacts on mental health. So anyone who is interacting in some way, whether it's living near, working near, or being educated in, interacting with a green or a blue space has all of these benefits. So again, social interaction, so important. Then as far as, like I said, when you are interacting with nature, there's a relaxation and kind of meditative sort of piece. Reduction in prevalence of chronic diseases. So the more aerobic activity you're getting in a park, whether you're walking a trail or walking through a park or biking, those can reduce your risk factors for type 2 diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease, reduction in obesity. And the one thing that I learned was that the physical activity guidelines for American adults through the CDC, I believe, states that adults need somewhere between 150 and 300 minutes of activity a week. So it's about 1 hour a day, I think, of physical activity per week. But the 80% of American adults don't meet that threshold or that goal. So what a great way to meet that goal than to pair up with a park and to interact with a park or a trail in some way to get that aerobic activity in. Improvement of mental health. The parks and green spaces provide a number of mental health benefits. People who spend more time in nature have enhanced cognitive functioning, attention, and reduced stress. They're also likely to display anxiety disorders and are more likely to report high levels of cortisol, happiness, less stress. And there have been a lot of studies on that relationship. Then we get to maternal and fetal health outcomes. This is an interesting one because you wouldn't necessarily think about it immediately, but the healthier the mom is, the healthier the baby's going to be. And if the mom has an active lifestyle and is setting the baby up for an active lifestyle, then the health outcomes of the next generation are going to be that much more impacted. You're really shaped by the habits of your parents in a lot of ways, and it starts at maternal and fetal health. And then again, physical exercise and heart health. Adults are not getting enough physical activity, and physical activity is one of the best outcomes from interacting with a park or being on a trail and whatnot. So I usually don't read off slides because I don't like that, but there's really no way for me to paraphrase this. But because the benefits provided by parks and green spaces are typically free and publicly accessible, they represent a cost-effective alternative and/or supplement to conventional health promotion strategies. And skipping down, they create environments that support active lifestyles and improve access to exercise opportunities. So I want to focus in on free and publicly accessible. This is one of the greatest assets, having a park, having a trail. You don't need a gym membership to recreate and to interact with nature. And we discussed that Sullivan County has a high rate of poverty, and I'm not going to pretend that having access to a park is a magical replacement for good health insurance, but there are only benefits that can be done from having that access and interacting with nature. So there are two groups that are particularly disproportionately positively affected by parks and open space, and that's young people and elderly. So I want to focus on these two groups because, of course, we focus on youth a lot now, but Sullivan County also has a very large aging population that can benefit from access to parks and trails and open space as well. So social interaction, parks and playgrounds are a really important place for children to learn social norms, social relationships, and understand those social interactions. I know during COVID specifically, if anyone has kids, I don't, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and COVID was a really difficult time for young children to have those social interactions and develop those relationships. But parks and playgrounds play a really important role in that. Reduction in obesity, again, 29 to 40%, depending on the district in Sullivan County, of children with that are facing obesity. Improved memory and cognition, reduction in stress. Children are stressed these days. They have a lot of expectations on them, and it's stressful. There's a lot going on in the world that's hard for them to process. But again, interacting with nature, good for their mental well-being. And developing fine motor skills. There are a lot of studies that have shown that children who are interacting with nature, experiencing their five senses in nature from a young age, spending time outside versus on a phone or on an iPad or tablet inside, there are so many benefits. And studies have also suggested that children with relatively low exposure to green space are more likely to have poor eyesight, suffer from obesity, and be exposed to oxidative stress. So again, get the kids outside. And then we turn to the other side of the spectrum, the elderly. Increased physical activity, again, is so important for prolonging life, especially when you have, I know one of our county's greatest assets, in my opinion, for recreation is the O&W Rail Trail. It's a flat trail. It's really easy to walk. And I know that there are a lot of users of all ages on that trail. So thinking about when you're developing parks or trails or open space, where are the trail grades? Is it something that someone can easily walk on and interact with? Better cardiovascular health, lower risk of depression. There was a 2018 study that I read that showed that if elderly people could even see blue space, so they could just see an ocean, a river, a lake. They could just see it. They didn't have to live on it, but they could see it from their home. They had an 80% lower risk factor of depression. Combating social isolation. Again, COVID really disproportionately impacted the students and those who are aging because of the health risks. And social isolation can happen a lot as you age, but parks are a great place to interact with others, meet others. And again, intergenerational interactions, I'm a huge proponent of. I know, Jane, you guys had done an intergenerational park at some point. Interactions between older people and young people are really important. I found this on the web. Are really important. So again, planning parks and spaces with everyone in mind is really, really important. So one of the things that all of this kind of hinges on is access. So you can't experience the benefits of green space if you can't access it. So how do we help people get there safely? I am not going to pretend we don't live in a very rural community. Most people drive to where they go, but you know, this presents a lot of difficulties if you don't have a car or a safe route to get to where you need to go to recreate outside. So when you're planning parks or public spaces, things to consider are bicycle routes or demarcating bike paths. If you have extra wide shoulders on the roads, these are great places to start thinking about bike paths on existing roads. If you check existing Move Sullivan routes, we have a public transportation route. It's limited, but we do have one now in Sullivan County. If the route passes a park that you know of, or a space that might soon be a park, think about how that could help people in your community reach those spaces. For those who do travel by car, I think off-road parking is a very serious and important consideration. I've driven by a lot of, like Catskill trailheads that people are just parked on the side of the road, and it's pretty dangerous. So when the topography allows, if you can create some sort of off-road safe parking, that's really important. And then also, when it's appropriate, sidewalks or walking paths. So in Narrowsburg, for example, that would be a place for a sidewalk or walking path. You're not going to create a sidewalk from here to Berryville. But where you can, having those spaces that are safe for people to walk on are important. Something that Sullivan Renaissance and Sullivan 180 had both worked on in Monticello was a project to connect Sleepy Hollow, a housing development in Monticello, to the school. And they built, they were separated by a small, group of trees small forest, large group of trees. And they built a path between the housing development and the school so that children could get there safely and walk there instead of going out onto Route 42. So things like that, kind of getting creative about what the space is, how people access it, and how can we expand their access? How can we get people to where they need to go is something that I always like to think about. And one really wonderful resource for that is Wanda Cruz at Cornell Cooperative Extension. She runs a program called Safe Routes to Parks. She also does safe routes to schools, but she has some really wonderful resources about how to plan for access. So I just want to plug that. And then leveraging the power of parks and open space. So when you have, as a municipality, when you develop parks or natural areas, it doesn't have to cost millions and millions. It doesn't have to be a huge, amazing state-of-the-art park. It can be something simple, and it just can be about activating them as public spaces. So how are you inviting people to interact with that space? A lot of times, for example, if you have a trail that people might not be familiar with, they're more likely to visit that trail for a guided hike rather than just go explore it on their own. So think about ways that people are interacting with space and invite them into it to experience it, because then they're more likely to return and bring their family and bring their friends. Events can be simple. They don't have to be something huge or planned. Seminars or trail walks or, demonstrations, but also you could host a walking meeting, have a meeting at a park, have a meeting on a trail, and get people introduced to the assets that you have. I do want to move on to have some time for questions and discussion, because I'm hoping that you have some questions or discussion. But so that's kind of my spiel about where we're at in Sullivan County and the relationship between health and open space. There's a lot of intersections. They might not always seem direct, but sometimes those smaller relationships are the ones that make a really big difference over time. And again, we're all kind of turtles here, slowly making change. And it takes time, but with time, I think we can get some really great things accomplished. So thank you. Yes.
I was reading the health disparities report from Sullivan 180, and one thing that came up was that people felt that even if the neighborhood was safe, that they didn't have access to parks in the evening. Should we be thinking of park access in the evening? I never really gave that much thought.
I would think here, I think that would apply more in, say, Monticello or Liberty or South Fallsburg, where people might be walking through parks to get home after work at night. That might not be as much the case here, because I don't think you would want to be encouraging someone to go visit the Tustin Mountain Trail at 10 o'clock at night, but that being said, how are places lit? How are they, do you have lots of foot traffic that can kind of monitor what's going on. I know in planning, Jane Jacobs is one of the founders of the modern planning movement. And she had this concept of eyes on the street. So the more people that there are on the street in a community, the safer it is. You're going to have people looking out for you. You have your neighbors looking out for you. So the more active a place is, the more safe in general that it will be. So again, increasing that activation and that activity and familiarity with a park or public space is really important.
I just wanted to make a comment. Hi, I'm Lori Stewart from the River Reporter. I was very fortunate to be at a conference center in Stony Point